I found him at the Crossroads. No blood, no struggle, just a man folded into silence like he'd been waiting to die. But it wasn't his death that haunted me. It was what he left behind, a tape, a name, and the guilt I'd been carrying ever since. 2:37 a.m., Crossroads Avenue. The kind of hour when the city forgets itself. No horns, no music, just steam rising from manholes like the streets are exhaling whatever they couldn't hold on to. I was halfway through the end of a shift that hadn't given me anything worth remembering when the call came through. Unresponsive male, no ID, Crossroads and elder, uniforms on scene. No urgency, no panic in the voice, just a sentence shaped like a shrug. That's how you know it's serious. I pulled up slow, tires hissing over wet asphalt. The sky above was cloudless, but the air still felt damp, thick with something unspoken. The kind of weather that sticks to your coat and makes your fingers feel older than they should. The kind of cold that isn't just temperature, it's memory. The man was laid out in the intersection like a question no one wanted to answer. No blood, no torn clothes, no skid marks. Just stillness. A body positioned with care. Arms folded across his chest, chin tilted slightly like he'd chosen how to be found. Someone had taken time with him. Someone had stayed long enough to place him down and make sure he looked at peace. But peace doesn't just happen. Not in this part of the city. Not at this hour. I crouched beside him. His skin was cool, but not yet gone. Eyes closed, mouth shut tight like he was still keeping something secret. No wallet, no phone, just a wristwatch. Wound, still ticking. Not a cheap one either. Leather band, polished face. A man who noticed the small things. The uniform stood back like they were waiting for someone else to call it. One of them, Rodriguez, knew. Looked like he was trying to remember if they covered this in Academy. They didn't. I asked about cameras. Nothing in sight. The corner markets was fake. Plastic shell, no wire. The laundromat next door had one inside, pointed at the register, not the street. The traffic cam was dead. Lightning strike last month, never fixed. So we had a dead man, placed cleanly in the middle of a quiet intersection. No witnesses, no cause, no signs of fear, no signs of anything really. Just a face I didn't recognize, and a feeling in my gut I couldn't shake. The air smelled like rust, like hot metal left too long in the rain. I've smelled that before, at train yards, at scrap yards, at scenes where people leave themselves behind. And yet, this didn't feel like a scene of violence. This felt like punctuation, like a man wrote the final line of something and laid himself down right where the story ended. That's what I kept thinking as the ME zipped him into the bag and I turned back to my car. Who lays a body this gently, and why? And what the hell happened before the city fell asleep? He wasn't dumped, he was placed. That much was clear before I even reached for my notebook. You work enough scenes, you start to see the difference. Dumped bodies look like anger, twisted limbs, loose shoes, dirt under fingernails from the fight that never made the report. But this one, this was something else. Arms folded like a prayer, jacket buttoned to the top, hands scrubbed so clean the skin looked new. No grime under the nails, no blood, no bruising. Not even a damn wrinkle in his slacks. Like he dressed for his own funeral and just decided to skip the middleman. The street lamp above flickered. One of those sodium bulbs that made everything look jaundiced and tired. It sputtered like it didn't want to bear witness. I almost didn't blame it. Rodriguez kept his distance, taking notes like he was afraid the ink might implicate him. "You think it's suicide?" he asked. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have thoughts, because the words didn't belong in the air yet. The moment didn't feel earned. There's a kind of hush that settles over certain scenes. Not reverence, not fear, something quieter, like the space between the last note of a song and the echo that follows. I circled the body, looked for signs, anything that would suggest struggle. Defensive wounds, bruises, a pulled thread on the jacket sleeve. Nothing. He hadn't run, hadn't resisted. Whatever happened to him, he accepted it. His shoes were polished, laces tight, soles barely worn. Which meant he walked, not wandered. He meant to be here, or someone meant for him to be. I noticed the cuff of his right pants leg, barely lifted. Subtle, but enough to suggest he'd sat somewhere recently, somewhere clean, maybe indoors, maybe not far from here. A place where he had time to prepare, to dress, to choose. Then there was the smell. Not decay, not alcohol. Soap, faint, familiar. Like the kind your grandfather used, that old bar stuff that didn't come in a pump or a brand. Something honest, something meant to wash away more than dirt. This wasn't violent, it wasn't messy. This was deliberate. Whoever put him here wanted him seen. Not discarded behind a dumpster or rolled into the river. Not a secret. A statement. A man at rest in the middle of the street. Not on the sidewalk. Not by a wall. Centered. And the street they chose, Crossroads Avenue, wasn't just coincidence. No one gets laid out at the intersection of two forgotten streets in the dead of night unless someone wants to say something. The problem is, I didn't speak the language yet. So I stood there, just breathing it in, trying to match the posture to the message. Stillness has weight when it's chosen. And this man, whoever he was, had been folded into stillness like it was the last truth he had left. Took half an hour before anyone found it. Wallet wasn't in his pocket, not where you'd expect. It was buried deep inside the lining of his coat, hidden like a secret he'd forgotten how to carry. Took some careful fingers and a pocket knife to tease it out. Whoever stitched it there had done it with intention. Whoever found it got lucky. It was mine. Brown leather. Soft from age, edges curling like they were tired of keeping things in. No credit cards, no photos, just a laminated ID that felt older than it looked. Martin DeWitt, 79, Ridgewood, Queens. One-time subway engineer, long retired, no listed spouse, no emergency contact, just a birth date, a home address, and silence between the lines. I flipped through the rest. Tucked behind the ID was a faded receipt, 3 weeks old. A cup of black coffee and rye toast from a diner in Midtown that shut down every day before lunch. Not exactly a late-night crowd. Time-stamped 7:42 a.m. paid in cash. Tip, $5 on a $5.50 tab. The kind of generosity that says more than the meal ever could. There was a key, too. Small, brass, locker style. No brand, no tag. Could have been for anything. A gym, a storage unit, a past he didn't want anyone unlocking. And then there was the matchbox. Black cardboard, logo barely visible. Stylized script, the gold lantern. No phone number, just the name and a skyline behind it. New York, 1969. I flipped it open. 4 matches missing, 1 half-burned. Smelled faintly of cloves and nostalgia. A relic. Something you'd keep not because you needed it, but because it remembered for you. I bagged the contents one by one, hands slow. My gut kept circling the same idea. This wasn't a man with nothing. This was a man with too much, pared down to essentials. What you keep in a hidden wallet says a hell of a lot more than what you carry in the open. And Martin, he was hiding something. Rodriguez stood beside me, chewing the inside of his lip like he wanted to ask a question he hadn't earned the right to ask. I didn't help him. Instead, I stared at the initials burned into the inside flap of the wallet, MDW, written in ink so faint it was almost dust. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for anyone else. Just a reminder to himself that he still existed. Martin DeWitt hadn't been robbed, hadn't been lost. He'd been placed, and what he carried close. A life's worth of memory boiled down to 3 objects and a name I didn't recognize. But the matchbox bugged me. The gold lantern. Nobody under 60 would have known it. Nobody outside a certain circle would have cared. Which meant, whatever story Martin DeWitt was part of, it didn't start tonight. It started a long time ago, and someone made damn sure it wouldn't be buried quietly. The diner wasn't there anymore. What stood in its place was glass and chrome and emptiness. A new condo building with a name that sounded like a skincare brand. Polished lobby, recessed lighting, windows too clean to feel lived in. No trace of the place that used to feed night shift workers and hungover poets. No chipped mugs. No clock that ran 5 minutes fast. Just another corner of the city scrubbed down to forget itself. But the bakery next door was still standing. And the woman behind the counter had lines around her eyes that told me she remembered things the city tried to erase. She was folding croissant dough with the kind of practiced rhythm that didn't require thought when I walked in, showed the receipt, and asked about the old diner that used to sit to the left of this place. She didn't even glance at the paper, just said, "Crossroads Cafe, closed 15 years ago. Rent hike." Then she looked at the receipt, and then at me. "You a cop?" "Detective," I said. "You remember a man named Martin DeWitt?" She set the rolling pin down, wiped her hands on her apron like she was stalling, then nodded. "Once." "Yeah, Marty." "Marty," she shrugged. "That's what he told us to call him. Showed up once a year, like a ghost with good posture." "What day?" "October 8th, without fail." That caught me. The date wasn't recent. The receipt and evidence was from last month, September. But the routine, the ritual, that had roots. I asked if she knew why. She didn't answer right away, just turned back to the dough, pressed into it like she was kneading the memory itself. "1 year," she said finally. "He sat in the same booth for 3 hours. Ordered coffee, didn't drink it. Just stared at the wall like he was waiting for someone who wasn't gonna show." "Did you ever ask who?" She shook her head. "Didn't need to. People don't come back to places like that unless they're haunted." He looked like a man trying to remember something he couldn't forgive. There was something in her voice, like pity, but deeper. Like she'd been in that booth before. Maybe not the same seat, but the same silence. "After the place closed," she continued, "he started coming here. Same time, same date. I saved him a table near the window. He never asked, but he always nodded like it meant something." She reached under the counter and pulled out a napkin. Folded, yellowing. A coffee stain shaped like a crescent moon. She handed it to me like it was evidence. "Left this once, October 8th, 4 years ago." On the corner, in shaky pen, "I'm still listening." No name, no message, just that. I looked at her, but she was already back to her dough, folding it over itself like it might hold some kind of answer. Whatever happened to Martin DeWitt on October 8th, it never left him. And now it wasn't leaving me either. I went to his apartment the next morning. Ridgewood, 3rd floor, walk up with a crooked railing and a buzzer that didn't buzz. The building smelled like old books and radiator steam, the kind of place the city forgets until it needs cheap rent and a story that doesn't scream. The super let me in with a grunt and a warning about the cat that didn't exist. Said Martin always paid on time, never caused a fuss. The type who brought his own light bulbs instead of calling down when one burned out. The type who nodded instead of talking. A man who asked for nothing but distance. His door was locked, double deadbolt. No sign of a break-in. I let myself in slow, expecting clutter or dust or the stench of rot. What I got was order, quiet. The kind of quiet that feels planned. The apartment was clean, not just neat, sterile. Like someone had gone through and erased all the fingerprints from a life. Everything had a place. Shoes lined perfectly under the bench by the door. A coat, navy wool pressed, hung on a hook with military precision. Keys on a dish. Wallet gone, of course. I had that. But everything else? Stillness incarnate. The kitchen was a shrine to function. 1 mug, washed and drying, 1 plate, 1 fork. The fridge held a half-empty carton of milk, a jar of mustard, and 2 apples. No leftovers, no mess. Nothing to suggest anyone else had ever eaten here. The bedroom was more of the same. Bed made tight enough to bounce a quarter off. White sheets, no personal touches, no framed photos on the dresser. Just a lamp, a clock, and a book. Engineering the Underground, a history of the NYC subway system. Dog-eared, spine cracked, notes in the margins in pencil, neat as blueprints. But what struck me most wasn't what was there. It was what wasn't. No family photos, no birthday cards, no letters, no signs of life having ever been shared. Even the walls were bare, like he'd moved in yesterday or had been planning to move out tomorrow. There was a story here, but it didn't start in this apartment. It had ended here, quietly, methodically, like someone closing the final page of a book they didn't write. I opened the dresser drawers. Socks folded by color. Underwear in rows, shirts starched and stacked with military care. I found an envelope in the back of the second drawer, empty, sealed. No address, No note. Just sealed. Like it was waiting for a message that never came. People think you can tell who someone was by what they leave behind. Martin didn't leave anything behind. Not accidentally, anyway. And yet, the silence in that apartment was deafening. It wasn't emptiness. It was something else. A held breath. A place left behind by someone who didn't expect to come back. Not because they were running, but because they'd already said goodbye. He didn't walk out of this apartment and die. He closed a door and let the story play in reverse. The brass key had no tag, but it spoke in code anyway. Ridged edges, MTA standard issue from a generation ago. I'd seen them before, back when lockers weren't just for luggage, but for lives people didn't know where else to keep. Transit workers used them for decades. Spare uniforms, books, lunchboxes, secrets. Took me less than a day to trace the serial. Grand Central, Section C, bottom tier. Far corner of the terminal's underbelly where the air tastes like steel and forgotten things. The locker stuck on the first pull. Took some coaxing, like it wasn't sure it wanted to open. Inside, dust. Decades of it. But beneath that, something solid. A conductor's cap. Navy blue. Worn smooth at the brim. The MTA emblem dulled by time and handling. Inside the band, stitched in fading thread, M. DeWitt. It didn't feel like evidence. It felt like a memory. There was a photo, too. Black and white, curled at the corners, tucked into the folded lining of the cap like it was safer there than anywhere else. A young woman, early 20s maybe, hair pinned up, wide smile, holding a baby against her hip like it belonged there. Neither posed. Caught mid-movement, like someone had snapped the picture before the moment could settle. No names, no date. But the look in her eyes said something deeper than time. Trust. And then there was the cassette. Old, cracked plastic. No case. Just the tape and the label. Written in blue ink that had bled at the edges over the years. 2 words. Nothing else. Forgive me. I didn't touch it right away. Just stared at it. There's a kind of weight that certain objects carry, heavier than the plastic or paper they're made from. A weight that says, this wasn't left by accident. Martin had kept it there, hidden, preserved, not lost, not forgotten, protected, like something he didn't want anyone to hear. Not yet. I bagged everything and sealed the locker back up like it still meant something, like the dust deserved to rest again. Back above ground, the city pulsed on without pause. Crowds moved, trains roared, and no one knew that buried beneath all of it was a box holding the past like a secret too ashamed to speak. I held the photo in my lap as the cab pulled away from the station. She didn't look like family. She looked like something else. Someone you make a promise to. The kind of promise that's easy to speak and impossible to keep. The cassette sat heavy in my coat pocket. I didn't have a player yet, but I didn't need to hear it to know what it would say. You don't hide forgiveness in a metal box unless it's the only kind you're ever going to ask for. And something told me Martin hadn't just been keeping that tape safe. He'd been keeping it from himself. I didn't notice it at first. The name was faint, nearly rubbed away by time and handling. But as I slid the photo from its evidence sleeve for the second time, the light caught it just right. On the back, written in delicate cursive, barely there, Elena Ross. Beneath it, a year, 1971. No more than that. No scrawl of affection. No love always, or summer at Brighton Beach. Just the name, the date. As if those 2 things alone held the entire weight of what the picture meant. I stared at the woman again. Elena. She had the kind of face that made you think she could quiet a room with a glance. The child in her arms was small, new, maybe 3 months old at most. Wrapped tight in a cotton blanket, its tiny fist curled around the fabric of her shirt like it had claimed her and wasn't letting go. She wasn't smiling, not exactly. Her lips had the shape of someone who had smiled recently, but not in that moment. It wasn't joy, it wasn't fear. It was something quieter, something harder. She looked like someone who had made a decision. I ran the name through the usual systems. Department of Records, Bureau of Vital Statistics, hospital archives. Nothing. No birth certificate for a child born to Elena Ross in 1971. No records of a hospital admission. No documentation of a father. No marriage license. No arrest history. No obituary. Just static. Like she never existed at all. Or someone wanted it that way. I narrowed the search. Ridgewood, Brooklyn. Nearby boroughs. Checked church registries, community boards, even yearbooks. Found a few Elena Rosses, but none that matched the date. None who vanished from the records just after a baby entered the frame. So I did something I hadn't done in a while. I printed out the photo, held it, stared into it like it owed me something. And somewhere between her eyes and the tilt of her head, I realized I'd seen that look before. In the waiting rooms of battered women's shelters, in the lobby of family court, on the faces of people who've decided not to leave, but to disappear. Maybe not because they want to. Maybe because it's the only choice the city hasn't taken from them. Whoever Elena was, whatever Martin meant to her, the past hadn't just been buried, it had been sealed shut. But even sealed things leak eventually. And Martin DeWitt? He'd carried this picture for decades like it was a wound that refused to scar, which meant he knew what happened to her. Or worse, he didn't. And that kind of not knowing can rot a man from the inside out. The tape in my drawer waited like a breath held too long, and suddenly, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what came next. The cassette clicked into the player like it belonged there. Like after all these years, it had finally reached the hands it was meant for, even if those hands weren't his, or hers, or anyone he ever knew. The hum came first, that faint electrical hiss, the sound of silence warming up, then a breath, soft, drawn through the teeth, nervous maybe, or tired, and then his voice. "Forgive me," he said, then paused, as if the words had tasted wrong in his mouth, like he wasn't sure if he meant them. I sat still, let the tape spool, let him take his time. It's been 50 years, and I still remember what she was wearing. Red coat, broken heel on the left shoe. She smiled when it clicked on the pavement, said it made her feel real. Another pause. You can forget a lot in half a century, what someone sounded like, what they smelled like, but not the last thing they said. That stays. The air in the room seemed to slow, like even the walls wanted to hear. She called my name, Martin said, voice thinner now. And I didn't stop walking. I saw the light change. I heard her. But I didn't turn around. He exhaled. It rattled, not like someone dying, but like someone remembering how it felt. She thought I was behind her. I was supposed to be. We were going to leave that night. Catch the 10:45 out of Penn. She packed light. Just one bag. She told her sister she'd write once we got settled. She kissed the baby on the head and said, "Be good." And then she walked away. The tape stuttered, clicked softly. His voice came back, lower now. I watched her from across the street. I wanted to call out, I did, but he was there. No name, just that. He. I saw the way he looked at her. I'd seen it before, the way someone looks at something they think they own. Martin coughed once, wet, controlled. I told myself I'd wait, just a minute, just long enough for her to get past him, just long enough to stay out of sight. I thought I was protecting her. Thought I'd meet her around the next block. A hollow laugh. But I never did. The tape clicked again, slowed. I don't know what happened after that, not the details, but I know she never made it to the train, and I know I never saw her again. Silence stretched, and then, that's the choice I carry. Not doing something, not stepping in, not saying her name loud enough. Another breath. She was calling mine. The tape didn't end with a bang, just a gentle hiss, like the machine was holding its breath for him. I sat in the dark for a long time, the machine humming like a conscience. Martin wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was leaving the truth where someone could finally hear it. And now I had. The pieces started to fit, but they didn't fall gently. They dropped like bricks. No music, no elegance, just weight. I went back through the tape 3 times, stopped where he said her name, stopped again when he talked about the bag she packed. The 10:45 out of Penn. That was real. I checked the schedules from 1971. That train existed. Northbound. Small town stops all the way through the Hudson Valley. A clean brake line for someone trying to start over. But they never boarded it. She never made it off that block. I pulled old traffic reports from the archives, found the right date, October 8th, 1971. 2 lines buried in a stack of yellowing pages. Pedestrian struck. Female. Red coat. No ID at the scene. Transported to Bellevue. DOA no name listed. Just time, date, and a vague description of the car. Late model sedan, dark color, fled the scene. Driver never found. Witnesses? None that stuck around. Elena Ross never made it home. She made it as far as the pavement. The crossroads where Martin last saw her wasn't a metaphor. It was literal. Elder and Crossroads, the same intersection where we found him 5 decades later. He went back. After all those years, he walked himself back to the spot. Not to forget her, not to find justice, just to feel what it meant to let someone go when they needed you most. Elena wasn't his wife. She wasn't part of the version of Martin that showed up in company newsletters or city pension files. She was the piece he kept outside the frame, the one he held close enough to love, but never loud enough to protect. The child was his. He didn't say it on the tape, but he didn't have to. It was in every word, every hesitation. The way his voice cracked when he mentioned her kiss on the baby's head. You don't remember that kind of thing unless it's yours. I found myself pacing in the dark, the city just a dull hum outside the windows. I couldn't shake the image. Her walking ahead, confident, brave, maybe scared but still willing. And Martin behind her, holding his breath like indecision was a shield. He didn't betray her with cruelty. He betrayed her with silence. He had 100 chances to call out, to close the space between them, to change the ending. But fear's a quiet killer. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And he listened. When the car hit her, she was alone. No man ran to hold her hand. No father shielded the child from the news. Just a woman, struck by steel and neglect, carried into history by a sentence in a forgotten report. That was Martin's crime, not murder, not abandonment, cowardice. And sometimes that's worse, because the world doesn't arrest you for standing still. But it never stops punishing you either. The logbook was a relic, thick, leather-bound, creased from decades of hands that barely looked up while they wrote. The ink had bled in places, the dates smudged by time and carelessness. But the entry was there, right where I knew it would be. October 8th, 1971. Pedestrian struck. Female. Approx. 25. Red coat. No wallet. No ID. The officer's handwriting was precise, clipped, no editorializing, no commentary. Just the facts as they were handed off. Intersection, Crossroads and Elder. Time, 10:16 p.m. It didn't list her name. She wasn't Elena Ross in those lines. She was Jane Doe #4721, tagged and processed like a footnote. The driver had fled the scene. No witnesses came forward. The city moved on. But someone had to have claimed her. A sister, a friend, Martin. That's what I thought, until I flipped through the follow-up pages and found nothing. No death certificate filed, no family listed, no burial permit. Just an internal note scrawled in pencil at the margin of the final page. Body transferred, unclaimed, interred city lot. Potter's Field. That's what they meant. Hart Island, the place where New York buries its forgotten. Mass graves marked by stakes, rows of pine boxes stacked deep. The city doesn't make ceremony for the unclaimed. It makes space. But that's what didn't make sense. Elena wasn't no one. She had a name, a sister, a man who watched her vanish from across the street. And yet, no one came. No one stepped forward to speak it aloud. Not to the cops, not to the morgue, not to the grave diggers ferrying boxes out to the island like freight. That kind of silence isn't accidental. It's orchestrated. I checked phone directories from the time. Ross S1 listing in the Bronx. A Sylvia Ross. No job, no apartment number, no way to tell if she ever got the call, or if anyone bothered to make it. Then I thought about Martin, his tape, his silence, the way he said, "I told myself I'd wait, Just a minute. That kind of delay doesn't just cost time. It costs people. The kind that get buried without names. No funeral, no eulogy. No one left to stand beside the grave and say, "She mattered." Just a woman erased, filed away, disposed of by a system too busy to look back and a man too ashamed to speak up. I ran a trace on the case number, found the ME's file. No trauma aside from the impact. No signs of struggle, no drugs, no alcohol, nothing that screamed murder. And still, nothing about her child, nothing about the man she'd waited for. The city had written her off in a single day. The streets had swallowed her name. And Martin, he'd let them. That's what guilt does when it grows teeth. It doesn't claw at your chest. It burrows, quiet, deep. And by the time you try to dig it out, you're just another old man walking toward the place it all went wrong, hoping someone else will finally write her name down. Took some digging, but I found him. He wasn't in the system anymore. Just a name on a faded precinct roster and a pension address in Yonkers. Officer James Kellerman, retired in '94. Spent 20 years walking the beat in Midtown and the Lower East Side, 2 divorces, a rebuilt hip, and the kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and processed too little. I met him at a bar 3 blocks from his apartment. A dive with sticky floors and a bartender who didn't believe in receipts. Kellerman was already 3 beers in and wearing a flannel that hadn't been washed in a week. When I said Elena Ross, he blinked, slow, then nodded like the name had been sitting in a drawer in the back of his mind, waiting to be dusted off. "You're the first person to ask me about her in, Christ, decades." He didn't ask why I wanted to know. Just motioned for another beer and started talking like we were finishing a conversation he'd never had the guts to start. "I was a rookie," he said. 6 months on the job. That night. I wasn't even supposed to be there. My partner got the flu. They stuck me on a traffic shift at Crossroads in Elder. Dead corner. Nothing ever happened there. Until it did. I didn't see the impact, he said. Just heard it. Tires screeching. The kind of noise that turns your spine to glass. He took a sip. Let the silence linger. She was already on the ground when I got across the street. Blood at the temple, 1 shoe off. Her hand was stretched out like she was still trying to reach something. "And no one stopped?" I asked. He laughed, bitter. "They never do. Hit and run. Car was gone before I even looked up." "What about witnesses?" He hesitated, looked down into his beer like it owed him something. "There was a guy," he said finally, "standing across the street. Just standing there. Coat buttoned up. Hat in his hands. He wasn't moving." "You talked to him?" "No time. EMTs were already on the way. I turned to wave them in, looked back, and he was gone." "What did he do?" "That's the thing," Kellerman said. "He didn't do anything. He didn't call out. Didn't step off the curb, just watched." "You remember what he looked like?" "Not really, not enough. White guy, late 20s, maybe 30s, clean shaven. But I remember how he looked at her, not surprised, not shocked, just devastated, like it was already over before it began. I sat with that for a while. Martin, frozen in place, watching the moment he could have stopped unfold like a slow-motion car crash. "You think he knew her?" I asked. Kellerman nodded without hesitation. "Oh yeah, he knew her." He drained the rest of his beer, set it down. And he never came forward, not once. I checked the logs for weeks. No one ever called. No one claimed the body. "He did," I said, just not out loud. Kellerman didn't ask what I meant. Some men understand silence better than answers. The address was buried in a yellowed city directory from the early 70s. Apartment 3B, corner of Langley and Crown. Ridgewood, the kind of building that had outlived its usefulness long before the ink dried. I drove out on a gray afternoon that felt like it hadn't quite decided whether to rain or just stay miserable. The building stood like a ghost. Boarded windows, padlocked entry, vines strangling the fire escape. The door was covered in city notices, condemned, unfit for occupancy, final warning. But what caught my eye wasn't the warnings. It was the bouquet, left just to the right of the door frame, nestled between peeling brick and rusted pipe, 6 white lilies still fresh. No note, just the flowers, wrapped in brown paper like someone bought them from a corner shop that still does things the old way. No frills, no ribbons, just truth. I didn't touch them, just stared. 6 lilies. The same number the bartender had mentioned at the jazz club. The same number that showed up in the old napkin receipts Martin left behind. His signature, quiet and sharp. I knocked on the door of the building next to hers. A second-floor window creaked open and a man leaned out, balding, shirtless, cigarette in hand. "You the one leaves the flowers?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "No," I said, "just trying to find out who does." He grunted. Never saw his face. Navy coat. Shows up once a year, same week. Usually in the morning, right after sunrise. Stands there for a while. Looks up at the second window. Then he's gone. "You ever talk to him?" He flicked ash onto the sidewalk. "He wasn't the type you interrupt." I asked the landlord. Found him sitting in a parked van halfway down the block, drinking coffee that smelled burnt before I even got close. He didn't flinch when I showed the address. "Building's been empty since '89. Should have come down 10 years ago. Nobody's in there. But the guy, yeah, I know him. Not by name. Navy coat, like you said. Neat. Quiet. Never speaks. Just stands there. Like he's waiting for someone to come home." "When was the last time he came?" He squinted at the sky, like the answer might be hidden in the clouds. 3 weeks back. Right before the rain. Left the lilies. Didn't look back. I asked if he ever tried to stop him. He shook his head. "Didn't need to. You don't interrupt a man visiting a ghost." I stood out front for a long time, looking up at that window. Elena's window. The wood around the frame was rotting, paint peeling in long strips like something trying to shed its skin. But I imagined her there, standing, waiting, maybe holding the child we didn't have a name for. Maybe staring at a street where she thought her life was about to change. Martin hadn't brought closure. He'd brought ritual. A quiet loop of grief, playing once a year, never loud, never acknowledged. 6 lilies. Same window, same silence. You don't do that for someone you barely knew. You do that for someone you never stopped loving, and never stopped failing. Her name was Miriam Ross. Midtown address. 5th floor walk up above a pawn shop and a shuttered dry cleaner. The kind of place with too many locks on the door and curtains that never open all the way. She answered after the second knock. Small woman, older than I expected. Hard lines around the mouth, gray hair tied back like she didn't have time for anything soft. I introduced myself. She didn't let me finish. "You're here about Elena." It wasn't a question. She stepped aside and motioned me in without a word. No small talk, no offer of tea, just silence, dense and familiar, like she'd spent most of her life trying to hold it back. The apartment was dim and narrow, cluttered with books and framed photos that didn't smile. There was only one picture of Elena on the shelf, black and white, taken from a distance like someone had been too afraid to get closer. She was laughing in it. Miriam wasn't. She sat across from me at a kitchen table littered with unopened mail. No hesitation, no performance. "Martin was a coward," she said, like it was the first sentence of a prayer she'd been reciting for 50 years. "He knew what that night meant. He just refused to live in it." I didn't push. She didn't need prompting. They were in love, if you can call it that. The kind of love that hides in corners and behind closed doors. She thought he was going to change everything for her. Said they'd leave together. Said he was the first man who ever listened. Miriam's hands trembled slightly when she reached for the sugar bowl, though she didn't put any in her tea. Maybe it was just something to hold. He didn't show, that's all I know. She waited. God, she waited. And when she finally left, she never came back. Her voice cracked on that last part, just barely. But she straightened in her chair like she wasn't going to let it happen again. I thought she'd run away, maybe changed her mind, maybe figured out what kind of man he really was. But when the cops came, said they found a body, said no one had claimed her, I knew. "You didn't go to the hospital?" I asked, careful. I did. 2 days later. Too late. They'd already buried her, like she was no one. She looked at me, eyes dry but raw. "And he?" "He came to my door a year later, stood there like a ghost with shoes. Said he was sorry. said he'd been late. I told him he was nothing. Her hands went still. The room went colder. He asked me if she'd left anything behind, she said. A note, a message. I said, yeah, you. Then I shut the door. She didn't look at me after that, just stared at the tea she wasn't drinking. He wasn't a killer, she said finally, but he let her die all the same. I didn't respond. Some silences aren't meant to be broken, only heard. She didn't say anything when she got up, just walked down the hall with her shoulders set like the weight was something she'd worn too long to notice anymore. The apartment creaked around her absence, a place built for two people who stopped talking a long time ago. When Miriam came back, she was holding a shoebox, cardboard, faded, the kind that once carried something light, tennis shoes maybe, but had been repurposed for something heavier. I didn't want it, she said, setting it on the table like it might explode. But I couldn't throw it out either. She didn't open it, didn't touch it again, just sat back, arms crossed tight like she was bracing for the past to speak. I lifted the lid. Inside, letters, dozens, neatly stacked, yellowing envelopes, some sealed, some not. No stamps, no addresses, just names, always the same name, Elena, and every single one dated October 8th, one a year. Written in the same careful hand, each envelope marked only by the year it was written. 1972, 1973, 1974, all the way up to the most recent, 2020. He'd stopped 5 years ago. Maybe the words had finally run out. Or maybe his hands had. I picked one at random, 1987. I still see you in every crowd. I still expect to find you at the end of every street. The city is loud, but somehow I keep hearing your footsteps in it. The letter wasn't long. None of them were. They read like confessions written to a grave that never got a name. Not apologies exactly. More like reports. Like he was checking in with her, saying, I'm still here, still carrying it. I opened another. 2003. There was a woman on the train today. Looked like you from the back. Red coat. Same walk. I almost followed her. I didn't. I couldn't. I was afraid she'd turn around and it wouldn't be you. Or worse, that it would be. That one hit harder. They weren't love letters. They weren't poetry. They were footprints. One step every year leading nowhere. A man circling the same wound, hoping one more lap around it would make it smaller. I looked up. Miriam hadn't moved. Why'd you keep them? I asked. Because he wrote them, she said. Because he kept writing. Because I thought if I threw them out, it would make what happened smaller. And I didn't want that. There was nothing else in the box. No photos, no tape. Just his handwriting. Row after row of regret pressed onto paper, like ink could make up for silence. I closed the lid gently. He was trying to tell her, I said. Miriam shook her head. No, he was trying to tell himself. And maybe she was right. Because sometimes letters aren't meant to be mailed. They're meant to carry the weight of what you never had the courage to say out loud. It was wedged between the others like it didn't want to be found. Older than the rest. Torn at the edges like it had been opened and closed too many times. Or maybe not enough. The envelope was thinner, soft from handling, and the paper inside was brittle at the folds, creased so precisely it looked like someone had tried to press the guilt out of it. October 8th, 1972. The first anniversary. 1 year after the intersection. 1 year after Elena vanished into the street and silence swallowed everything that came after. The handwriting was shakier than the others, less deliberate, as if he didn't quite know what to say, or maybe knew too much. I went to the church, the same one you talked about. The one with the blue door and the cracked window that made you laugh. She cried for you that morning. I couldn't answer. I told her we'd be okay, but she didn't understand. She was too small to know what I'd done. I paused. She, the child, their child, the one no record had acknowledged, no file had confirmed. But here she was, in ink, no name, no birth certificate, just a presence. Real, loud, breathing, crying, waiting. I took her somewhere safe, the letter continued. That's all I can say. I didn't know how to keep her. Didn't know how to be what you would have wanted. I wasn't ready. God help me, I wasn't ready. He never said where, never said who, just that vague phrase, somewhere safe. No hospital listed, no family mentioned, no friends, just a closed loop, Martin and the baby, for however long that lasted. I read the rest of the letter in silence. She has your eyes, wide, watching, like she knows too much already. I wanted to hold her forever, but I knew if I did, I'd lie to her, and she deserved better than that. The letter ended without a signature, just a final line scrawled in the corner, like it didn't belong. Tell her I was trying to be brave. Just once. I folded it back with care, as if it might tear under the weight of its own memory. Miriam hadn't read this one, I could tell. She wasn't watching me now, just staring out the window like the years outside had finally caught up to the inside. She had a child, I said quietly. Miriam didn't turn. I know. Did you ever meet her? No. Her voice was flat. Elena never said anything. Not to me. Maybe she didn't get the chance. And Martin? She shook her head. He never mentioned a child, just grief. But this wasn't grief. This was something else. This was abandonment disguised as mercy. Or maybe mercy disguised as cowardice. He hadn't run from Elena's death. He'd run from what survived her. And the city, like it always does, let him. Foster system archives aren't built to be searched. They're built to be forgotten. Names redacted, records sealed, files stuffed into drawers with keys long since misplaced. But I kept digging, through boxes that smelled like mildew and regret, because something Martin wrote wouldn't leave me alone. She cried for you. I couldn't answer. I had a date, October 8th, 1971, and I had a window, those days and weeks after Elena's death, when Martin made himself scarce and the city went back to pretending she never existed. Somewhere in there, a baby was left behind. The file I found was thin. Emergency custody report, no name listed. Female infant, approximately 3 months old. Found swaddled in a knit blanket outside a Catholic clinic in the Bronx. October 10th, no birth certificate, no note, no sign of injury, just left, alive. Filed under Jane Doe, infant, case hash 11,284. She was transferred into the city's temporary care program and moved upstate within the month. Fostered twice. Adopted the following year. All official, all clean. The kind of paper trail you'd expect when no one asks too many questions. But what caught my eye was her birth date, July 2nd, 1971. Same as Elena's baby would have been. It lined up. The letter, the timeline, the silence. I pulled adoption records. Took me 3 hours and 2 favors. Her new name wasn't public, but her license was. She'd become a nurse, lived in Poughkeepsie now. 30-something years of clean records, state certifications, 1 minor speeding ticket in 2003. Claire Doran, that's what they'd renamed her. I don't know if it was chosen by the state or by the people who raised her. Didn't matter. She wasn't a mystery anymore. She was real, and she was still here. I sat in my car with the file open on the passenger seat. A picture of her from a medical conference badge, shoulders back, eyes forward, that kind of confidence you build when no one ever gives you anything for free. Dark hair pulled tight, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. I stared at her face longer than I should have, looking for echoes of Elena. The curve of the jaw, the shape of the mouth. It was there. Subtle, ghost-like, but there. Martin never said her name in the letters, never left a trace beyond that single line. I took her somewhere safe. But now I had a name, a place, a life. She hadn't disappeared. She'd been buried in bureaucracy, in silence, in the kind of well-meaning systems that forget how to ask why. I didn't know if she knew where she came from, but I was starting to think Martin had followed her life from a distance. Maybe birthdays, maybe graduation, maybe postcards he never sent. And if he had, that silence was more than shame. It was love, unspoken, undelivered, and almost too late. She agreed to meet me at a park near the Hudson, public, neutral, wide open, the kind of place where the air feels too clean to carry anything heavy. But that didn't stop the weight from following us. Claire was already sitting when I arrived. Bench near the water, hair pulled back, scarf wrapped tight like armor. She stood when she saw me, didn't offer a handshake, just nodded once, brisk and silent, like she'd been rehearsing the moment and didn't want to waste it on ceremony. We talked for a minute, just small things. Weather, parking. My badge tucked in my coat like it had something to be ashamed of. Then I said the name, Elena Ross. She didn't flinch, but her eyes changed, focused, like someone turned up the volume in her head. "She's my mother," she said flatly. "I always knew that much. They didn't tell me early, but they didn't hide it either. Said I was left at a clinic with a note, but there was no note. I checked." She was too composed for this to be news. "And your father?" She looked at me then, sharp and still. There wasn't one. Not on paper. I didn't correct her. Not yet. "There's something else," she said, and for the first time her voice wavered just a little. "When I was 9, I started getting postcards. No return address, no message, just one word on the back, sorry, always signed with the letter M." She reached into her bag and pulled out a rubber-banded bundle, worn thin at the corners. She handed them to me like she wanted them gone. I flipped through them slowly. Postmarks from all over the state, sometimes further. Always the same date, October 8. Always the same word, sorry. Some were on scenic backgrounds, fall foliage, lighthouses, trains. One was a photo of Grand Central. Another, a field of lilies. "I never responded," she said. "I didn't know who it was, but every year I kept expecting one, even when I told myself I didn't care." "Do you still get them?" "No. Last one came 5 years ago. Same year Martin stopped writing the letters." I handed the stack back. She didn't take it right away. "I didn't come here to reopen something," she said. "If this is about my mother, if this is about him..." She trailed off, looked toward the river. Wind stirred the ends of her hair. "I've lived an entire life not knowing, not asking, because I figured whatever the truth was, it couldn't make up for the silence." "I think he knew that," I said. She nodded, slow. "But he still tried, didn't he?" "With what little he had left." We sat for a while without speaking. The water moved. People passed. Life kept doing what it always does, ignoring what matters. She stood first. "If you find out more," she said, "don't protect me from it. I'm not a child." No. She was the only adult in a story full of people who never learned how to speak when it mattered. And for the first time, I realized, maybe this wasn't Martin's story anymore. Maybe it never was. It took 3 hours and a stack of city maintenance records to find it. East River Park, North End, just past the walking trail that no one really uses once the cold sets in. The bench sat facing the water, peeling green paint, rust at the bolts, the kind of wear that made it look like it had belonged there forever. It didn't stand out, but it had weight. I sat for a while, let the breeze run its fingers through my coat and watched the current move like time itself, slow, relentless, never going backward. The bridge loomed to the left. To the right, the skyline sharpened into glass. But the bench, it just waited, like it always had. The parks worker found me there, older guy, utility vest, weathered face that looked like he'd cleaned up 1,000 messes no one ever thanked him for. He didn't ask why I was sitting there, just nodded toward the slats like I'd found something familiar. "You're here for the man in the navy coat," he said. I didn't deny it. He leaned against the railing and took off his gloves slowly, like he was warming his hands on memory. "Came every year, same day, October 8th, never spoke. Sat for an hour, maybe more. Didn't move much, just looked out, like he was waiting on someone who was never late, just gone." "You ever talked to him?" "Once. Asked if he wanted coffee, said he was fine, but before he left he always did the same thing." The worker bent down and pointed beneath the bench. Right there, on the underside of the wood, was a patch of residue, tape, old and cracked. Nothing attached now, but it had a shape, a small circle. "A subway token," the man said. "One of the old ones, brass, same size every year. He'd tape it up under the bench before he left. Neat, always the same spot." I swallowed something heavy. Why? The worker shrugged. Maybe he was paying for a ride he never took. He walked off after that, didn't say goodbye, just disappeared into the trees like the memory wasn't his to keep. I stayed, thought about Martin, about the subway tunnels he used to know like veins, about Elena's red coat, about the girl he left behind, about how many stories get told in gestures no one notices until the person's gone. A token, one each year, no name, no note, no ceremony, just the weight of something owed. He never told Claire, never tried to meet her face to face, but he was there, watching, honoring, repenting maybe, or trying to. Not everyone gets to leave flowers. Some people leave coins under benches where no one's looking, and hope that one day, someone does. He knew. You don't fold your coat that carefully unless you've made peace with the cold. It was in every detail. The shoes tied with precision, the collar turned just so, the wallet hidden deep inside the lining like a secret passed between ghosts. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't madness. It was orchestration. Martin DeWitt knew his time was up. I kept going over the route. His apartment in Ridgewood to the Crossroads and Elder intersection, same place Elena was struck 50 years before. He would have taken the F train, then walked the last 10 blocks. Maybe he paused. Maybe he looked at the skyline the way she used to. But when he got there, he didn't hesitate. He chose that corner like someone picking the last word of a sentence. I traced his steps back to the moment he left his building. Security footage caught a glimpse. Navy coat, slow pace, head up, hands in pockets. No limp, no struggle. Just a man walking through a city that didn't recognize him anymore. What do you bring with you when you know the walk is your last? Martin brought stillness. He brought the weight of a name he never said out loud. He brought the memory of a baby crying in a blanket and a woman in a red coat stepping into the street. He brought every October 8th with him. And when he got to that intersection, Crossroads Avenue, Elder Street, he didn't collapse. He didn't fall. He didn't die in motion. He laid himself down. That's what the posture said. Arms folded, legs extended like sleep. No blood, no fear, just release. Like a man surrendering not to death, but to the silence he'd spent half a century feeding. He didn't want to vanish. He wanted to be found, right where it happened. The same patch of pavement, the place where Elena took her last breath and no one said her name. Now he was there too, facing the same way she had. I keep thinking about that. The symmetry. The man who ran from her pain, circling back to wear it. Not to escape it, but to join it. To leave himself as the last page of a story no one finished. No note, no explanation. Just a body, neat, present, waiting. People say there's no poetry in death. They're wrong. Sometimes death is a poem. And Martin's was written in sidewalk cracks, old subway tokens, and the silence between two roads. The same place he should have stood that night. The place he finally returned to, not to be saved, but to answer. There's no press conference, no breaking case, no suspect in cuffs or jury waiting to convict. Just a woman who was buried without a name, a daughter who never got to know hers, and a man who finally let himself be seen when it no longer mattered. Martin DeWitt didn't leave answers. He left echoes. The department won't open a case, too cold, no evidence, no witnesses, nothing they can put on paper that will turn into justice. The file gets labeled closed by default. But I keep it on my desk, not in a drawer, because what happened wasn't legal, it was human. Claire didn't cry when I told her the rest. She sat quiet, absorbing it, like she'd always suspected there was more, and now that she had it, she wasn't sure what to do with it. She asked me if he was a good man. I told her he was a broken one. She nodded, didn't ask anything else, just pressed her hand to the bench where he used to sit and whispered something I wasn't meant to hear. Miriam didn't want the details. She just said, "Did he suffer?" And when I shook my head, she closed her eyes like that was the one kindness he'd earned. There's no closure here, no neat ending, just a pile of postcards with a single word, sorry. A stack of letters addressed to a ghost. A grave marked only by habit and a bench that overlooks a river that never forgives, only forgets. But I remember the lilies, 6 stems every October left by a man who couldn't find peace in words but tried anyway. I remember the matchbox from 1969 and the way her name sounded in his voice, soft like a prayer. And I remember that he didn't run, not in the end. He walked back to where it all began, not to undo it, not to confess, but to become part of it. A living footnote to a story he'd spent 50 years too afraid to finish. So I finish it for him, not because he deserved it, but because someone has to. Because the city, this endless city with its noise and fire escapes and people who disappear between one subway stop and the next, it doesn't remember the loud ones, not really. It remembers the ones who leave something behind, a token, a letter, a bench. Guilt without a name still casts a shadow. And in that shadow, I found a man who couldn't save the woman he loved, but tried, at least, to leave her one last truth. He couldn't rewrite the beginning, but he handed me the ending. And now it's written.